Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for your time today. Today we have Peter from Staffbase, and we're going to talk about this idea of an intranet, right? And there's I think what people get confused around a lot, and why you're here today, what you're going to talk about is there seems to be, I think you're going to touch upon several different buckets that the word intranet gets associated with. And it's important to pull them into their respective buckets, to acknowledge that they exist, and to make sure that you're not trying to fit it all into one respective bucket, and understand that each of those buckets have their purpose, rightly so. So yeah, that's it. And Peter, thank you very much for coming. And let's talk about these buckets. So when someone says, I have an intranet, does your brain just explode, or what happens?
yeah, basically.
Okay.
I mean, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Intranet is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Look, the word you use, buckets, or breaking this concept of the intranet down and into some component pieces, I think can be really helpful. Because as we'll get into, the conversation about intranets gets confusing really fast. And the conversation, especially about how does your idea of what an intranet work in the world together with Office 365, or how does it work in the world together with Slack, or how does it work in the world together with other things, gets really confusing. So maybe the first place to start with what an intranet is to think of the historical intranet. Like, where did this come from?
Sure.
What did the old word intranet mean? And I think there's a couple of ways to come at it. I mean, one way is to think about almost like the origins of the internet as a way to come into understanding the origins of the intranet.
Okay.
Right? So when you think of the internet, the original internet was the World Wide Web.
Right.
So if you think like the first website you ever saw, it's a website, it's a web page. And everything about this is centered on the page. And what you could do with the page was basically just text, right? And it was big innovations that allowed us to have images, that allowed us to have video. Anything interactive over the web wasn't there in the beginning.
Right.
So I think the concept of an intranet in its oldest incarnation is sort of just like a web page, but for a company. Another way of coming at like the oldest idea of what an intranet is to think about especially the concept of a SharePoint intranet.
Sure. Because
SharePoint is so dominant in the market, and the Microsoft collaboration tool suite is so great and is so well used and well loved by so many companies. The SharePoint intranet has its origins in SharePoint, the point where you share things. So originally it's like a collaboration platform or a place for sharing documents and managing documents. So instead of emailing you something, Jason and I might just say, hey, I'm going to throw it up in the SharePoint. And that's this web page where you and I both have access to it, and we can both grab the file off of that web page. So if you think of that as like intranet 1.0, it's basically just a site, and then the SharePoint intranet is like this little wrinkle on top of that. It's sort of like a site together with some documents that also go with the site. That's the old world of intranets and where they come from. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like when you're painting these pictures of the internet and the intranet, I immediately start to think, okay, well, what is trying to be solved here? Where is the problem? And it sounds like that whether it's either tra or ter version you're using, what you're trying to find a way to do is to simplify a way to present information.
Right.
A lot of it might be documentation. A lot of it might be images. It could be anything that is useful to an organization or whoever is intended to be in front of this platform.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to the ter or the tra.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's really interesting. So talk to me. I think that when we expand out And now that we have that down, SharePoint itself is something that gets talked about a lot, especially today when it comes down to intranet.
Yes.
And you're still at its core, that it sounds like that's still spot on. Like, we're trying to figure out a way to have a repository of everything that is important to an organization. And if it's your first day, you need to have this key, and you use the key to get into the door, and then voila, you have access to every folder and shelf and book that you've ever needed to have access to, specifically to you, Peter, because it's your first day.
Right.
But the problem is, I think, and you can talk a lot more about this, is that when that door is opened, it's not as easy and wonderful and magical as it sounds. It might be there might be more challenge left than meets the eye.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one way to think about it is the development of the economy itself, the development of software tools and categories is all about specialization. And what happens is, over time, we get more and more specialized tools that find ways to do things in a more and more sophisticated way. And I think the challenge with SharePoint, you can simplify it pretty well into these two requirement sets.
Okay.
The one requirement set being for managing documents, and the other requirement set being for pages that display information in a way that's easy to consume. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that these are two different requirement sets, and they have different features that you might build against them, and different ways that they get used in the organization. So talking about the document management, that part is going to be, originally the SharePoint was just this one point between you and me. But once you have a company with 10,000 people and they're all using it, it just gets maddeningly complex. Just this one thing of sharing things on a point. You have a folder hierarchy of how the information is organized. You have version control. So if I make changes to the document, you make changes to the document. Which wins out? How do we recover a document that's been lost? Permissioning into that. So you're new. Which folders do you get access to on the SharePoint on your first day? And you can just see how you can build an entire product development organization around solving this one problem really well of managing documents. And then on the other hand, you have that displaying information originally just on a page, but doing this in a more and more intelligent and beautiful way, which itself is a very challenging problem. Targeting the content, figuring out, I want to prioritize this content over that content. Visually having it be more engaging. I think of some of the early innovations of just the news carousel on an intranet homepage, right? That was one of the first big innovations on that set of requirements. So because you have two kind of different big tangled problems that you're solving, I think you ended up with SharePoint. The core problem of the document management is something that they just got better and better and better at. And this other problem of the communications layer was, put it this way, our prospects come to us and tell us all about how much effort they put into making what's available on SharePoint now good enough for their needs for that layer. And there's an entire ecosystem of companies, consultants that are out there that have their whole business, the entire ecosystem is built on top of SharePoint, improving or customizing SharePoint to the point where it more effectively solves that communication problem. So in the end, this SharePoint intranet is sort of a hybrid of two things, the document management system and the communications intranet. And it needs a lot of help on the communications intranet side to meet the needs of companies that are out there. And even with that help, a lot of the projects just don't have the levels of engagement that people are looking for. So they invest, they have SharePoint, they bring in a consultant or a development shop that does lots of custom beautiful pages on top of the SharePoint, and still their readership is 15%. Or they have non-desk workers, and it doesn't matter. You have lots of beautiful pages, but they're on a desktop computer.
Right.
And these people are in the field, they're on the factory floor, they're in the stores, they're on locations. They're not going to be looking at those intranet pages. So this historical intranet, for various reasons, was just not really meeting all of the needs of internal communications and companies.
Like what you're seeing? We hope so. If you'd like to learn more about Staffbase and what Staffbase offers, please go to staffbase.com and click on Schedule a Demo. We'd love to show you the product. Now back to the podcast. Enjoy.
So there's also a lot to that too, that it seems that when we as an organization that presents a employee engagement platform, that's one way of looking at it. There are many ways of looking at what Staffbase is. But I do hear a lot that this idea of there's this, I guess, a frame of mind that we're coming in to replace something. And I don't think that's true. I think we're trying to certainly improve an experience. And primarily because we've identified that all that communication piece that you've been talking about, the way that people expect to be communicated with and have access to information is so vastly different than it used to be. However, the way that documentation is stored and organized and administered is pretty good. And it doesn't really need to be changed that much. How it's available, searchable, and presented is a very different conversation.
Right.
So integration really becomes key here, I think.
Yes.
And but let's talk about the different types of intranet that we see today.
Yeah.
I think that now that you've really done a nice job of putting rails around what was, where we are, and when this, I think how you put it, the window, the nice window that was placed in front of SharePoint in order to start that journey of making it easier to find information. That alone has evolved exponentially, especially because of the different channels that are now available in terms of what intranet really is.
Yes. So it's evolved a lot.
Yeah.
One of the first steps that it took along the way were the so-called social intranets. And this was, if you've ever had a platform like Jive. I worked at a company that used Jive for their intranet. And Jive was kind of taking this concept that was over from SharePoint of like documents and then communications of pages, and then mixing in the spice of all the exciting things that were happening with social media, which didn't exist before then.
Right.
So social media comes on the scene, and Jive as a company and some other companies that are coming into the space are thinking, how can we add social to this thing that had been going on? So now it's not just a website, but it's users. You have a user profile. I have a user profile. Maybe there's some interaction, some ways that we can chat with one another. And so this created a new class of intranets that are sometimes called social intranets, or even evolved versions of this that we see today that I would term as like collaboration intranets. And the way I describe it is like this. They're looking to take that old idea of the web page that conveys information really well, and to add this other spice to it, either of like social media style things like comments and likes on top of that content, or collaboration tools like stuff for getting work done. And this is where the confusion really starts to settle in. So as if it weren't confusing enough, documents, shop window layer, and the desktop, communications experience, now you have this idea of collaboration tools. And here, what we really mean is things like Microsoft Excel or Slack, like chat that's not meant for communicating at the organization-wide level, but it's meant for communicating among a small team. Yeah. Like you and me, if we were going to work on this podcast or some project together, we could just use this tool to do it. It's a day in, day out type tool. That collaboration suite is something that companies have tried bundling in together with the communications layer, so that you have the page, which displays the information, and some of these tools that come along with that.
Right.
And what we see is that this approach, it gains some traction in the SMB space.
Right.
So for smaller companies who maybe don't already have a big enterprise arrangement with Microsoft, where they're buying all the Microsoft suite, or they're not on the G Suite, then for them, it could make sense as this kind of low-cost alternative. Oh, I can get some collaboration tools that are workable enough for my company and our needs, and I can have that desktop communications experience.
Yeah, so it's like that's very interesting. It sounds to me like most organizations, and when you took a step back and said, for the SMB space, you can accomplish that task, right?
Right.
You can collaborate, you can create a Google slide, you can share that slide through Slack, you can have a one-on-one conversation regardless of where that person is located. From peer to peer, you can do this. And you could do it with a team of 100, you could do it with a team with 150, maybe even 200 potentially. Starting to get a little bit more challenging though as the teams are growing and as are the document repository.
That is a great point, right? So the insight is like all of the problems get more complex with scale.
Yeah.
And they all get more complex at the same time.
Yeah.
So your document management problem is a lot hairier. It's like an apples to oranges difference when you move from 100 people to 1,000 people. Oh. And that's just the document management component. Right. The communications component also has this element to it, as does these collaboration tools. And so this is kind of where we'll come around to our vision of the market, is especially where we want to serve more enterprise customers that are a bit larger, is you have to have best of breed. You can't have a jack of all trades, master of none approach in any of these spaces. So if it comes to your collaboration tools, we think there's a best of breed right now. I mean, that's especially Microsoft, to a lesser extent the Google suite. I mean, what are the other players? Do you really want to compete with them? And do you want to try to solve that problem at the same time as the document management system problem, SharePoint or Google Drive? You want to compete with all that set of features? And then the communications layer. So in our view, all of this stuff has got to be a best of breed approach. Right. So you've got best of breed for your document management, which for most organizations is going to be SharePoint. Best of breed for your collaboration tools, which in a lot of organizations, again, is going to be the Microsoft suite, plus a constellation of other like point tools and things, depending on you're a team of designers or you're a team of marketers or whatever it is. You're going to add those solutions, the best of breed solutions, into the mix. And then what we really think is the best of breed also enterprise communications platform. And not just, when I say that, not just taking the concept of the page, the old intranet web page, and focusing on that for the enterprise, but adding in this brand new thing of the app and being on the phone.
Right.
And so really, with the way that the world has changed, on top of all the other changes we've been talking about, it's got to be best of breed, focused on communications or focused on each problem, a best of breed approach. And then it's got to incorporate this new channel that's changed everything, which is the phone. Smartphone adoption now 80%, reached 80% in 2016, 3 years ago. So now basically everybody's got one, and that changes the game for internal comms.
So it's safe to say that with 80%, a number like that in 2016, that if you are employed and working for an enterprise, you have a smartphone.
It becomes a viable channel for the vast majority of organizations.
Okay.
I mean, at Staffbase, we grew up working with a lot of companies that had non-desk workers, and the reasons for that are pretty obvious. Like, you can help close a communications gap and solve your problems that are associated with communications and cultural transformation with this kind of best of breed focus that I talked about. But if you're talking about like adding a mobile channel where previously the person didn't even sit at a desk and literally didn't have access to your intranet, that's a game changer. That's not just, an increased performance from increased focus and a couple extra good features, but that's really like a brand new channel. So this is like the area of the world, the type of company that we really focused on right from the beginning. So we've worked with a lot of companies where people don't have email addresses, and you're closing that big gap. And the truth is that there are still a lot of people who don't have mobile phones. I mean, in the United States, for example, we got 300 million people living here. There are probably 10 million adults or something like that who still today, they don't have a smartphone. But the essential point is it's reached a critical mass.
Yeah.
And it's reached this place where, what are you comparing it to? You know, even if you work in an industry, and we talk to folks like this all the time, where like they don't think, they know for a fact that not all their employees have smartphones. Maybe they think the number is like 75%.
Okay.
You know, and this would be like an outlier situation, like an incredibly low number.
Right.
75% of our employees have smartphones and the other 25% don't. But the truth is, your alternatives don't approach 75%.
Right.
Your alternatives are like email and you're reaching 15%.
Right.
And that delta, that 60% delta between them, is still so valuable that's what the penetration means. It means viability in almost every circumstance for almost any company.
Interesting. So yeah, we're talking about manufacturing plants where there are people that they're on the floor. They don't have a desk. They don't have a desktop. They don't have a laptop. We're talking about truck drivers. We're talking about people that are on the field repairing things.
Yeah.
That, you know, they may have a tablet. They may have a smartphone. A communications device, so they can talk to their family. Right. That's how they get that accomplished. And so enter the idea of layering an app that can then integrate and expose all of that information that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Communications, document storage, social, all of that together into this one solution that is accessible to 75% of the organization. At least.
And that's what we at Staffbase see, that this is where the world is going, that you're going to end up with this best of breed approach in all these different areas, including communications. And your communications solution should not be just desktop, but it should be mobile too, and it should be one communications platform. Because after all, communications is all about like being connected. And the most connected way to be is that it's a single platform. Even if however you wanted to use, for example, Staffbase alongside an existing SharePoint intranet, the connections between them become essential for this to work really well. So that's where, as you'll see in our other Staffbase content on our website, like this is a big focus for us, that we connect really well, whether it's with existing SharePoint intranets or with the other best-of-breed solutions. The connection points actually become a part of the specialization that you have to have as the communications specialist.
Well, that's just it, too, because another layer of intranet was there is a piece of intranet that can be a gateway to either your other applications or your single sign-on solution, and that removes a barrier of entry, right? Because I've worked with people, I've talked to people that they get confused by what it is that they're supposed to be accessing, how they access it, and by making it as simple and clear as possible. I'm on my mobile device, I push the button that looks like my logo, I see the information, I start to understand those different buckets that you were talking about, whether it's communication or it's storage or it's easy access to those other pieces that are critical for me to get my job done.
Yes. And this is all of these tools, right, are focused on ease of use. All of software around the world is trying to become easy to use. So if you're Google Drive or you're SharePoint document management, you're trying to make yourself easier to use. But we really believe that this thing that you're talking about, this one-stop shop, this ability to be the one place that you go and easily find what you're looking for, that's really close to the core competency of communications itself. And that's why we think that responsibility is best placed in that same place. We've been talking about this communications intranet or that communications platform as that best of breed thing, separate from your collaboration tools, separate from your document management. We think that's also where your front door to your digital organization should live. It just seems to be the most natural home for a connection point, a bridging of gaps, right? So these tools, of course, they're going to make themselves easier to use, but they're never going to master connecting to the rest of the world, because at the end of the day, that's not their core function. But communications is connection. That's what we do.
Like what you're seeing? We hope so. If you'd like to learn more about Staffbase and what Staffbase offers, please go to staffbase.com and click on Schedule a Demo. We'd love to show you the product. Now back to the podcast. Enjoy.
Interesting. So I think that really helps understand the complexity and the common confusion that happens when someone says, I have an intranet, which is where we started this conversation. And it's not an easy, when someone says I have an intranet, it's not an easy 1, 2, 3 question path to understanding what that even means. But it is good to recognize all those different buckets and what intranet means to many different organizations. But I also think it's important now that after you explaining it, I think all of those buckets relate and are important to every organization, period. Whether you're a startup growing into the SMB, the MM, or you're into the enterprise now. At the end of the day, the organizations are still desperately trying to find ways to be engaged, communicate, and humanize the culture. Right? Yeah. And this is where this cultural transformation comes from, right? And I think those buckets are huge indicators of finding where you can be successful in that transformation.
Yeah.
So if you had to just narrow it down to the 5 points, could you just repeat that for me so I can just hear them again and just draw out that bucket in my brain?
Sure. So if we thinking about 5 points as like 5 discrete categories.
Sure.
And let's put this in the present tense, or maybe even like over the next few years.
Okay.
That these are really like the categories that you see,
sure,
where you want best of breed for each. I think 1 point would be like document management and storage. So this is information that you need to store, organize really well, retrieve, etc. That's point 1. Point 2 would be these collaboration tools. So I need to get work done. So I'm going to chat on Slack, and I'm going to send you the file that you and I will be working on later today. That kind of a team getting work done, those tools, that's a second sort of category. I think communications, the communications intranet, this thing that we've been talking about, that will become a third discrete point all to its own.
Okay.
And I guess now that I'm thinking of it, looking at like a possible future state, I don't know if social, for example, gets its own like category. And I don't know if mobile has its own category either. And these are two things that I think today we see examples of. So let me say more about that.
Please.
Social, this is like Yammer, which is basically Twitter for work.
Yeah.
So you have these platforms where they're just trying to be social media, but in a work setting. I don't know if that really becomes important for businesses anymore. I think it gets kind of subsumed into that communications point, that point 3. And the same with mobile. Today, you have this space, and we've been called it for much of our 5 years of existence, an employee app, where the focus of the descriptor is the app, is just saying the mobile piece. And we think that's too narrow in scope, and that's not going to survive this transition to the one enterprise communications platform, because it's got to be mobile first, but mobile can't exist as a category standing on its own. It's got to be all communications. It's got to be the whole digital enterprise in one sort of category.
Interesting. I'm actually gonna break tradition here, and I'm actually going to jump back into one point you made because it got me very interested. That's that social element.
Okay.
So when you talked about it, it really made me think. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of this desperation for engagement. But maybe instead of engagement, the right word is actually adoption. So people are actually, this is maybe where social has really come into play. It's like, well, gee, a lot of people are communicating this way. Maybe if we communicate that way, we'll have more people communicating that way. And it's that maybe that's where it's like we're kind of grasping at straws, trying to find different ways to just please be engaged. That's where it goes back to engagement again.
Yeah, it does, and it's a great point that you make, and I think it very much describes the era that maybe has been and is sort of passing now. Of trying to chase that mystical creature of social media that's so captivated the broader world and like put that energy that's around social media and the way that everyone's using it into an enterprise context. But it doesn't work to just say, look at that over there. Like, let's make something that superficially resembles it in a work context. And we see that's not really getting that much traction. But we know what does work in communications. And what does work is relevance. Like, when people get spam, in whatever form it comes, like, it's just not going to work for them, right? If you're on, and all of the social media platforms operate on this same principle, right? They're trying to make it relevant for you. They're trying to make the advertising relevant for you.
Sure.
Because if it's not relevant, like, you're going to tune out. You're going to just stop. You're going to stop checking your email. You're going to stop reading those emails. So we think relevance is essential. And how do you get relevance? Well, you've got to be thoughtful about what do people care about. You've got to target things, make it more local, more personal in nature. So I think, relevance. And then the other principle that's so important is reach. And what we mean with reach is just like, are you in a place that you'll actually get to people?
Right.
Or not? And social's been amazing because they have great apps that, you can get to social from anywhere. A lot of the enterprise tools don't have the same reach. And the reach challenge is more subtle in the enterprise context than you would think. So let me just
I'm ready. I'm ready to hear this.
And dive in a little bit more on this reach topic. And let's talk about the mobile phone for a second.
Okay.
So the mobile phone penetration is so high for personal devices because people buy them and they use them for their own stuff, for my stuff, right?
Right.
It's not company mobile phone penetration that's reached 80-90%.
Right.
And this is really important distinction because the channel, we're not saying to companies like, hey, buy everyone in your company a mobile phone so that you can now communicate with something that's in their pocket. We don't even think that would work anyway.
Right.
Because the whole key is that it is the personal phone on so many levels. I mean, if you already have company phones, if you have BYOD, that's working well for your organization today, then just leverage that existing channel, right?
Sure.
But in terms of creating something new, we're not saying start from scratch. We're saying actually go to the personal device where they are. And the reason I say this is subtle is because a lot of organizations think like, oh, we're just going to add mobile into our strategy. And they don't in their minds split mobile into this personal category versus a company category. Consider what would happen if they did. If they thought themselves, I want to add a mobile channel. Oh, but mobile is always personal and or company. Then they would see that their potential reach is like, at most organizations, cut down very low. Because most organizations don't provide everyone with a company device.
Right.
When you're on the personal phone, now your app is not mandatory.
Right.
You can't force people to download it. And this means the whole power dynamic is changed. And the whole project isn't what you thought it was. It's not, I add mobile And just like my website, which I fully control, I just push it out. You don't control it.
Right.
They're not going to download it. They're going to turn off push notifications. You don't control it. And in that way, the mobile channel is a personal channel. It's actually a big insight that it's personal. It's not owned by the company at all. And it means the power dynamic is different, and it means that your relevance, in order to achieve that reach that you think was as easy as, oh yeah, just like the website, I just add mobile. It's not that. You have to add mobile in such a way that people will do it from their personal devices. And this means it's got to be branded so that people trust it, so they identify with it, so they can even find it in the first place. Like, your employees don't know who Staffbase is. They're not going to care, right? You're a big enterprise company.
Yeah.
What? It's got to be branded on the outside and all the way through. And it's got to have use cases on it that keep employees coming back. And it can't abuse its powers. If you're on somebody's personal phone and you start spamming them with push notifications, with big company announcements coming from an office that's 400 miles away, guess what? They're going to turn push notifications off. They're going to delete it from your phone. And I think this is this like twist that mobile is not just a tick box channel, but it's personal mobile and has a different power dynamic and a different approach, is something that we here at Staffbase really understand in a way that, again, like talking about confusion, it can be confusing. Like having a mobile app versus an app that gets the challenges of personal. So branding must be there. Those use cases must be supported. The relevance and targeting must be there. The governance of push notifications must be there, because the user experience in this power dynamic of personal phones has to be tops. And if it's not a channel anymore. They'll take it out of your hands.
Exactly. Because the tolerance, I mean, it's just like this, the moment you win a game, you delete it.
Yep.
The moment something no longer becomes interesting to you, it's taking up space.
Yeah.
So you have to respect that zero tolerance, the impatience of mobility.
That's right.
Very interesting. There was one thing you were touching on too that I just thought was really relevant to a conversation we were having with a prospect the other day, talking about how these field workers, if someone is under the weather or needs to be able to share healthcare information, something as simple as that, I could see that such a simple thing can become very difficult to find in a situation like an emergency, a situation like that. But if under something like a branded application that is very easy to access and to very quickly be able to share something like your healthcare information to your spouse or something of that nature, that's personal. That's I'm trying to help my kids, that kind of a thing, and that there's another level of that dynamic where I trust and want this to be on this device that is personal to me. And then layer on top of that caution and carefulness in trying to communicate to your organization and respecting the nuisance of seeing information thrown at your face and not making it spammy is so important.
And that's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a magic pill.
Right.
You don't just add water and you have this amazing communications channel. It really has to be thoughtful. Yeah. And it has to build trust. It has to meet the user's expectation on so many levels. And if it does, it's transformational.
Totally.
I mean, we have customers who 6 months into a project, 85% of their employees have adopted, and 75% of those are using it every day. That's transformed how that company communicates, and those people, it's on their personal phones, but now they've got easy access to the things that they want to find. But again, it's got to be just that right combination of understanding the personal context, giving them stuff that's valuable to them, communicating and launching in the right way. It's it's not easy. There's no guarantees, but it's transformational if you get it right.
And you're seeing that the organizations that buy into that, that are saying, that are treating it with the respect that it deserves, are seeing the numbers. They're seeing the results. They're getting the return, right?
Yeah, they're getting the return in a lot of different ways. They're seeing it. The first place they're looking for it, honestly, is just readership. Like they want to know, in the old world, 15%, 30% of emails were being read. And in the new world, 60%, 70%, 80% of important messages being read. And that's one of the first aha moment, deltas that they're looking for. Even simpler than that, it's like we had non-desk workers, we weren't reaching them, period. Not enough them. To now we're reaching 80% of them. So it's this kind of difference in the first instance, and then over time they're seeing things like turnover rate, seeing things like safety. For so many organizations we work with, safety is a key topic. They're using the app to deliver safety videos, to make it easier for people to find safety information, and they're seeing results in their business operations from the fact that those videos are available. An example is at Reinert Logistics. This is a logistics company. Basically, they run a lot of trucks, and the trucks are driving, thousands and thousands of miles. Some of the videos that they circulated on the app were videos about how you change the tires in the right way. And those videos led to a 15% decrease in some of the safety incidents that they were having in their operations.
That's incredible. Wow. This has been great. Peter, I thank you for your time and look forward to having more of these discussions. I think we really dove into the complexity of what the word intranet means and why it's not a one sentence answer to anyone, period. And all the different layers or buckets that the different pieces fall into, and what other buckets are waiting that haven't been filled in yet.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.